I feel like a locomotive, sipping, drinking Arizona. Mixtape just around the corner, did a lot in California. Can't wait to drop this on you. Yeah, they gon' have fun with that. Smash like Songam, and my songs gon' break through like a running back.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. It is Thursday, December 1st, 2021. I was almost going to say December 2022. Crazy. Where did the time go? Anyways, Mark Daly here, welcoming you all, and my good friend, Mr. Mark Hamilton, sitting here across from me in our virtual studio with a big, that's like a big contented smile you have on your face, my friend. What's going on? Are you just happy that Friday's almost here? You ready to get your weekend on? Is that what's going on here?
Am I? And my friend, I
I
hate to kick off a show with a bit of Parents Corner, but my wife is away for a couple of days, so it's just me and my 5-year-old, who, by the way, we're sitting here recording this at 10 p.m. He's somewhere in the house doing something. But before we got started, I was brushing his teeth, and as all good parents do, when we brush his teeth, we lie him down on the bed and hold him down by pressing down on his forehead while he flings his limbs around. And I'm like scrubbing his teeth, and he's kicking and screaming more than normal. And I realized later that I may have brushed his teeth with sunscreen lotion, which wouldn't actually be the first time. So I tried to make up for it by giving him a bowl of candy and have him watching Hotel Transylvania on the bed in the master bedroom. So that's how my evening's been, my friend. What about you?
Well, I was just going to say, if that didn't sort of seal the deal for the Father of the Year award in your favor, then nothing will, obviously. But yeah, it's been a regular evening around here, fighting with the kids to get them to do their homework and to clean up their crap, because our house is like a time capsule. People will take a book or a plate of food or clothing, and it literally gets dropped and never gets picked up again. And I refuse to pick up other people's crap, as does my wife. And I mean, you can literally chart the course of my children's lives in this house just by going through the various piles of stuff. And when they got, I'm pretty sure that's been here since April, that those sneakers, they've been there since July. I don't even know what's on that plate, but that's been there for a good couple of months, because whatever used to be on there is long since degraded or turned to dust, but anyways, that's just I'm not bitter. I'm definitely not bitter or angry.
It's all good.
Yeah, anyways, we didn't come on the show tonight to complain about anything like that or the ups and downs of the family life. We're here to complain about Formula One, I guess that's kind of what we do sometimes, or talk about the good and the bad and everything in between. But yeah, it's definitely some things to talk about this week. And the big one, Mattia Binotto no longer with the Ferrari. He's been there for almost 30 years, 25 plus years. Started out as an engineer, ended up as a team principal the last couple of seasons, and kind of oversaw the turnaround that we've seen from, they were definitely headed in the wrong direction a couple of seasons ago. He's got them pointed back in the right direction, and ultimately fell quite a bit short of the mark this year in 2022. Looked like they might be challengers for one or both of the world championships, but obviously that didn't turn out. And this is news that, of course, it's big news, but there was a lot of smoke with that fire for about a week or 10 days. And of course, that tweet that Ferrari made, I guess, about a week or 10 days ago, saying there's absolutely nothing to these rumors that we are going to part ways with Mattia Binotto, and his replacement is already confirmed behind the scenes and definitely will not be starting here at the beginning of January 2023. That certainly didn't age well, because that's pretty much exactly what happened, what they were denying wasn't going to happen. So there's that as well. But big news, Mark. Absolutely big news when you have something like this break at a big team like Ferrari.
Yeah, I'm very much ready to talk about this. In fact, I've already talked about this. And if you haven't checked it out, I did an emergency podcast with Tim Hraney of the TSN Racing Pod a couple of days ago. And we spent about half an hour getting into this. And it's funny because some of the things that I shared on that podcast in terms of my opinion on the subject have only actually been reinforced since then based on some news and some development. But my friend, you're not beating around the bush at all. We're going right through the news topics,
Going
through
right
Fun
at it
Stats
this
Corner and
week.
jumping right into
Right
the story.
to
But
it.
I think we can probably circle back to that, but I think this is a great place to start because it's probably the biggest story of the week and we don't want to bury it. But my opinion on this is and I'm going to cut to the chase on this. I think it's a colossal mistake on behalf of Ferrari. And I absolutely get the frustration that the Tifosi had and that Ferrari fans had this year with some of their incredibly unforced errors, whether it was the driver, whether it was strategy, whether it was reliability issues. I get all of that, but I think the challenge is, and this goes back to something that Tim Hauraney said on our podcast earlier this year, if not Mattia Binotto, then who? Like you said, this is a guy that's been with that organization for 28 years. He came there straight out of school as an engineer in 1995. He was the chief technical officer. He was a technical director. He's worked in virtually every department at that factory. He understands the politics and the complexities of one of the biggest racing organizations on the planet. And to simply let him go, push him out the door is remarkable given the fact that the senior leadership at Ferrari, and I'll talk a little bit about that in John Elkann and Vigna, they have no specific replacement. In fact, I don't think they even have a replacement in mind. And I think a lot of this goes back to the expectations that Ferrari may have had for 2022. And a lot of the senior leadership within that organization had said, look, 2021 is a write-off. It's the last year of the turbo hybrid era in terms of the regulations as we knew them. It was a building year. Let's get to 2022 when the new regulations are out there. And 2022, let's start winning races. And, you and I talked about this, that in 21, Ferrari was very much trying to temper expectations of 22, very much trying to temper expectations, because I don't think that internally they really had any expectations that they would be contending for a championship. But I think what happened at the beginning of this season was actually really damaging to Ferrari and to Mattia Binotto. And that is that they got off to a really good start, but they got off to a really good start in the way that Red Bull got off to a really bad start. And I think what we saw early on was artificial and it wasn't sustainable. And that you look at the DNFs that Red Bull suffered at the beginning of the season, they were DNFs related to a common component in the car that they buy from a shared supplier. And it was just bad luck. They also had a very, very significantly overweight car at the beginning of the year, and that was something they were going to be able to solve. So I think what we saw at the beginning of the year were some phantom performances, and it was great, and it was sexy, and it was so cool to see Charles Leclerc have a 40-plus point lead in the Drivers' Championship. But anyone who understood the technical nuances of the championship knew that probably wasn't going to be sustainable. And I don't think that Ferrari, even if you put aside all their unforced errors this year, were ever going to be able to compete with Red Bull. And I think Mattia Binotto's future, as it's turned out, as we've discovered, was probably already in question a year ago. And there was a report, and we can talk about this in a couple of minutes, but there's a report that came out that John Elkann, who's the executive chairman of the broader Ferrari group, and the CEO, Benedetto Vigna, sorry, I always get that name wrong, Benedetto Vigna, who's the CEO, like I said, who actually just came to this organization a little over a year ago, that the two of them were shopping for a replacement for Mattia Binotto a year ago. And it's reported that they'd approached Andreas Seidel last year at this time, and that they'd approached Christian Horner last year at this time about assuming this job. And of course, nobody's going to sign up for this poisoned role. Nobody's going to sign up for Ferrari knowing that they're openly discussing the availability of the team principal role while somebody's under contract actively. So I think Mattia, and this was a resignation, it wasn't a firing, but I think he jumped before he was pushed. And I think it really comes down to the fact that the executive chairman and the CEO had no faith in him. And like I said on Tim's show, or Tim said on his show a couple of days ago, this feels like one of those situations in the NBA or the NFL or Major League Baseball where you get a new team president and he wants to put in place his own general manager, and you get a new general manager and he wants to put in place his own head coach. And I think in this case, especially with Vigna, the CEO, who only came in a year and a half ago, this is a matter of them wanting to get their own guy there, somebody new. And it's particularly remarkable that this is a guy in Binotto who could survive the cheating scandal of 20. I shouldn't call it cheating because it was just a secret agreement, quote unquote secret agreement between the FIA and Ferrari in 2019 around the engine regulations and some of the funny stuff that was happening there. But he survives that. But a year and a half later, they're openly shopping for a replacement. So it's a remarkable situation, remarkable nonetheless, because they clearly don't have somebody in mind. And it's probably going to be Frederick Vasseur at Sauber, because of course Sauber is undergoing a new ownership change, and Audi will be assuming more and more of an ownership stake in that team over the next 3 years. So that's likely where he's going to probably go. And then a report that came out today now actively links Mattia Binotto with Audi, and that he's in open discussions about assuming a role at Audi. So it sounds like Mattia Binotto will probably land on his feet. But I think that this is a big blow for Ferrari, because even if they are able to bring somebody over who can assume that team principal role in an instant, this is somebody that will have no relationships or experience managing the sheer complexity and scale of the Ferrari operation at Maranello, and that's going to put the team back. And the other challenge is when you come over to Ferrari, it's not just that you're managing a Formula One racing team, but you're deeply entrenched in the politics associated with the road car division. But furthermore, you're part of an operation that builds power units. If Vasseur comes over, he's used to operating and managing a super small, compact racing team. This is the biggest racing team in the world, arguably, that also creates power units, which is directly adjacent to a road car division, which is part of a much bigger, complex political, economic consortium. This is a terrible move for Ferrari, and I hope they land on their feet, but I can't help but think this is going to push them back 6 to 18 months.
Well, didn't Enzo Ferrari say way back in the day that Ferrari is a racing team that also builds road cars, or something like that? Something, I'm paraphrasing, but it is, it's interesting. If you read the release that Binotto made in news of this resignation, he said, quote, "I am leaving a company that I love, which I have been a part of for 28 years, with the serenity that comes from the conviction that I have made every effort to achieve the objectives set. I leave a united and growing team, a strong team, ready, I'm sure, to achieve the highest goals, to which I wish all the best for the future. I think it is right to take this step at this time, as hard as this decision has been for me. I would like to thank all the people at Gestione Sportiva who've shared this journey with me, made up of difficulties, but also of great satisfaction," end quote. But, I think the key part in there says, I'm leaving a company that I love, which I've been part of for 28 years. 28 years. Let that sink in for a moment. He's been there, done that. He's got the t-shirt, he's got the DVD, he's got he's got everything, right? He's seen it, he's done it all. And somebody that comes in from the outside will just, they're going to be thrown into the deep end. And how do you even begin to fathom the organization and all the nuanced twists and turns and all the politics internally and externally that is Ferrari? I mean, who's equipped to take that role on, Hammy?
And
I don't know. Do you know
who would
who would want
take
to?
that? Yeah,
Exactly.
that's
Great
exactly
point.
it.
Great point.
I mean, ultimately, think about it this way too, that he is being, and I know this is a resignation, but if the resignation didn't happen, he was possibly going to be pushed out, or he was very aware that he was going to be pushed out.
Exactly.
But this is a team that finished second in the championship. So when you talk about John Elkann and you talk about Vigna, the CEO and the chairman, if second place in both of the championships isn't sufficient to retain your job, what are you signing up for? You're signing up for a job that will require you to be a championship, not contender, but you will be expected to win the championships next year. The only other piece that I should add to this, and we talked about it a little bit over the last couple of weeks, is it is widely reported in the French press, especially, that there was significant discord between Charles Leclerc and Mattia Binotto, really stemming back to the fiasco that was the Ferrari performance at Silverstone earlier this year. And of course, Carlos Sainz won that race, but he ultimately had a favorable pit call that didn't go that didn't go Charles Leclerc's way, and Charles Leclerc was leading that race, was asked to stay out. They had a late safety car. Carlos Sainz was asked to pit. He got on fresh tires, actually won the race, and Leclerc didn't even finish on the podium. And of course, there was that very animated moment in the paddock afterwards where Mattia Binotto was caught on camera wagging his finger in a very frustrated Charles Leclerc's face. And the report was that Charles Leclerc and Mattia Binotto had not been on speaking terms since that day, so 6+ months. So the reality is, if Ferrari was shopping for a replacement for Binotto last year, he ultimately got a 1-year reprieve because they couldn't find his replacement. And then all of a sudden, the team's most marketable driver in Charles Leclerc has a complete breakdown in relationship with the team principal. That may have been the writing on the wall. And like I said earlier, I think this is a kind of a situation where he jumped before he was pushed, before it got too messy, before he was exited himself. He'll probably be on gardening leave for 6 months as these things go, but I would expect that he's going to be a highly sought individual, because like you said, he's been there for 28 years. And don't forget as well, he was there during the super team of Ross Brawn and Jean Todt and Michael Schumacher and Kimi Räikkönen. Like, he was there for some real glory days, but unfortunately he's not going to be there much longer. And now this is a team that, how many team principals is this in the last decade, man? 5? Like, it's absurd how many people they churn through.
Oh, I know. I was just looking at it beforehand. I mean, before him, you had Maurizio Arrivabene, then you had Stefano Domenicali, who's now the. Well, I mean, look, we just did the last two where they ended up. Domenicali's now the CEO of Formula One. Arrivabene went on to become the CEO of Juventus, one of the biggest soccer clubs in Italy, one of the biggest clubs in Europe. I mean, that's just amazing right there. But one thing that kind of like comes back to me, like you were saying a little bit earlier, is that they got off to a really good start to this season and Red Bull struggled. And I wonder how that really plays into the equation, because they were saying a year ago that, we're not going to be really competitive for another 2-3 years down the road. They weren't looking at, they weren't looking at being competitive this year, winning races and being in that championship conversation. They were saying we're looking at maybe 23 at the earliest. So if that was, the messaging that's coming down from the top, and you finish second in both championships, then what really is the beef? Like what is the problem, the issue that they have with Binotto? I mean, is it like you say, it's just, you got a new CEO in place and he wants his own guy running the team? Like what is it? Is it just a clash of personalities? Is it a lack of a common defined vision? There's so many more questions left unanswered than are answered, and I can't help but wonder, if I'm the CEO at Audi, I'm like, yeah, let's get on the horn to this Binotto fellow, because he's kind of the guy that would be an ideal fit for our Formula One program. Maybe he's not the guy that we hire, but you would not be doing your due diligence if you don't talk to this guy about this, the role that they have for their team coming online here and then entering Formula One in 26.
Dude, this is, I'm so casual on this podcast. I'm like, dude, bro, homie, what's up?
I now know where Parsa, your little guy, gets it from with his yeah, baby.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
This, by the way, this wasn't even the biggest story in the Italian sporting press this week. Are you familiar with the gigantic soccer story that erupted out of Italy this week, which, by the way, is not even just Ferrari adjacent, but directly Ferrari linked?
No, actually, I've been so insanely busy this week, and I'm so out of touch. Share it. Let's do it.
The entire board of directors, and you're going to have to make sure my pronunciation here is correct, but the entire board of directors at Juventus, is that how you say the club? The soccer club?
Juventus. Yep.
Yeah, the entire board of directors at Juventus, including the club's president, Andrea Agnelli, and CEO Maurizio Arrivabene, have resigned over charges of massive false accounting, a statement from the Italian soccer club said Monday. The decision to collectively resign came after an extraordinary meeting was held Monday after, quote unquote, new and accounting opinions from independent experts were obtained. The Serie A team's financial statements underwent scrutiny by prosecutors and Italian market regulator Consorb in recent months for alleged false accounting and market manipulation. The company has denied any wrongdoing, but the entire board, including Maurizio Arrivabene, has resigned. And The other thing that as a result of this, of course, is that club has ownership links to Ferrari as a whole. But the Italian press, as of a few hours ago, is now alive with the thoughts of Maurizio making a triumphant return to Ferrari, which he led headfirst into the FIA cheating scandal in 2016, although he was effectively gone by that point. So it's crazy how all of these different stories intersect. But again, to kind of recap, so we can go back to the beginning of the podcast outline, I think this is a big mistake, but it's clear that the senior leadership at Ferrari had no faith in Mattia Binotto.
Well, clearly they didn't have faith in either of them. I guess is the big the point, right? But yeah, where do they go from here? I mean, they have real confidence in themselves if they went both to Andreas Seidel and especially Christian Horner reportedly or allegedly to try and woo him to go over to Ferrari. And I mean, if you're Christian Horner, do you really want to leave Red Bull and go to the I don't want to say dumpster fire, but the less than optimal situation at Ferrari? I mean, I just I can't see Christian Horner going to Ferrari any more than I could see Toto Wolff going anywhere else other than Mercedes, regardless of the fact that he has ownership stakes in the Mercedes Formula One team. It just doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't compute. But it's like, are they going to do? Because I mean, they got Arriva Bene. He was CEO at Philip Morris International before he became team principal at Ferrari. Are they going to do the same thing? Bring in somebody that's completely from outside, not only the team, but outside the sport of Formula One to try and manage this thing? Maybe. I don't know. Like what options? I don't know if there's anybody really wanting to jump into that. I mean, maybe Fred Vasseur at Sauber does. But, like you so correctly pointed out, he's used to running a fairly small, compact racing team with a very limited budget and way of doing things. And then to go from Sauber Alfa Romeo to Ferrari, I mean, that's two completely different beasts. I mean, who could and who would want to manage this beast? I don't know. Not very names are popping to the top of my mind. All right. Well, that's good. Let's still plenty more to talk about. So let's just park it here for a moment. We're going to take a very quick break. And when we come back on the other side, we'll keep going with the rest of the news from this week. So don't go away. We'll be right back. All right. Welcome back to the show. Mark Daly, Mark Hamilton here, where we devoted nearly 20 minutes to the Mattia Binotto story and Ferrari. That's like basically taken up 50% of our show notes here. So let's just go back to the I was so like keen to talk about this one because we haven't had a chance to really talk about too much. Before I just put the cart before the horse and kind of like jumped right over everything else. So we had a couple of things that we wanted to address. We did our off-topic show last weekend, which was a lot of fun. I don't think we mentioned Formula One once, although maybe a couple of times tangentially. That was really kind of fun to do something completely different. Apparently, you've got a chicken sandwich question that you want to share, or that came up that we'd have.
It was one of the big questions for the show when we didn't get to it. So my answer to that, and I am a huge aficionado of chicken sandwiches. I love a good chicken sandwich. I like to make them. I like to buy them. I like to consume them. My favorites are up here in Canada. We've recently got Popeyes. In fact, there are now 2 locations within just a couple of kilometers of my house. So thank you to the Popeyes conglomerate for making that a reality for me. We also recently
the newest one is like literally right across the street from your house.
Dude, I can almost see it, which is ridiculous. And then we also have a chain up here in Canada that I think actually started in Newfoundland that's now open coast to coast called
Mary Brown's.
Yes.
I haven't tried it.
Mary Brown's?
I haven't tried it yet. Popeyes, good. I mean, their chicken sandwich is outstanding, but I've heard good things about the Mary Brown's one, but I haven't checked it out yet, but I think they have a restaurant fairly close around here in Tri-Cities.
Yeah,
where we
right
live.
Across from Costco in Port Coquitlam. Oh man,
That's it. I love That's
it.
okay.
So my favorite three, and I'm gonna cop out. I don't have a favorite, but my favorite three are Popeyes, Mary Brown's, and then there is a Saudi. There is a Saudi chicken place, fast food chicken place called Al Baik, which is excellent. So for me, the top three, and I kind of juggle it around: Al Baik, Mary Brown's, and Popeye. So an American, a Canadian, and a Saudi chicken place. Do you have a favorite, or is this not necessarily up your street? Do you have a more refined palate than I do?
Perhaps, but I'm gonna go with Popeyes. Yeah, I
Yes.
love that chicken sandwich. But, you know, just based on the fact that it's easy for me to make that choice because all the other ones I've tried at different places, you know, I just can't compare them. But
The
also, I
KFC
have,
one is so bad, man. The others are so
yeah.
bad.
I know, right? And I haven't tried the Mary Brown's one, and I haven't been to Saudi Arabia, so I haven't been able to try their take on a chicken sandwich yet. But yet another reason to make a trip
Yep.
to that
Hey,
part of
KFC is
the
not a
world.
sponsor, right? Or are we gonna have to edit this?
Well, if they are, they're not anymore after this segment. Anyways, of course, one thing we forgot to do up the top of the show was give a shout out to our good friend JT the Human for that fantastic opener that we have for the show. That just gets me in the mood every time we hit
Me
the
too.
record button. Just puts me in the right headspace. Again, we announced the winners of our fantasy league. Do you have the names off the top of we announced
Yeah,
it last week.
I
We're
do,
waiting to hear
absolutely.
back from a couple of people so we can get you your prizes.
So, Andy, thanks for reaching out. You finished not only first in our pool, but as you called out, you finished 26th globally. So, out of the millions of people that competed in the F1, the official F1 fantasy pool, you finished 26th globally. And of course, you won our pool. To Aaron K and Whitman R, I haven't heard from either of you. Please reach out via Twitter DM or via the show email, or reach out to me personally via Twitter, Instagram, however you're comfortable. I want to make sure that we can arrange to get your prizes. Andrew, your subscription to Race Weekend, it should be hitting within the next couple of weeks, depending on how quickly Amazon ships. And also, I'm working on a secondary prize for you as well, which I'll reach out to talk to you about.
Awesome. Another couple of things here. Oh, some upcoming guests. We have Sam Cooper from Planet F1 will be coming on the show to talk about, obviously, Formula One. Ed Spencer will be joining us soon, and Charbel will be coming back for a repeat performance to talk about Power Units 102 after the Power Units 101 that you guys got together for a couple of months ago. I think it was back in August. And then one other miscellaneous piece of news: Logan Sargent, the American who will drive for Williams next year, will rock number 2 on his car, which is pretty cool. And finally, and these ones, the little sort of fast facts and little hits here. In the, I guess we can throw this under the category of see what they did there. Gunther Steiner, the team principal at Haas F1, is going to release his first book, Surviving to Drive. Available to pre-order soon. So see what I mean? See what he did there? Very
And
clever,
that will
Gunther.
definitely be a book club. We actually got confirmation with Bird today. We will definitely be treating that as a book club. Now, before you jump into the really cool Fun Stats Corner, one thing as well, and I realized I may have sent you an older outline. I just wanted to quickly shout out a bunch of awesome listeners who took time to recognize that we were amongst their favorite Spotify podcast listens. So shout out Danny. I'm just going to scroll through the feed. Danny, thank you so much for sharing. Much appreciated. We love the support. To Michael Stewart, as always, my friend, like you said, second year in a row, we topped your most downloaded on Spotify. I love it. Javier Ramos, thank you so much. Almira Ishmael from Vancouver, BC, thank you so much. Ava at Super Ava, thank you so much for sharing. Joe Santucci, my friend, thank you so much for sharing. I love it. Joe, yep. And there's more and more and more. And I think I've missed a whole bunch of them. So to everyone else that I did miss, my feed is proving a little bit problematic. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you for sharing. It makes both of us so happy to see that. And we love to be able to retweet all the love and praise. So thank you to everyone that
guys.
shared, and thank you to everyone that continues to listen. And we usually save this for the end. If you listen on Spotify, if you'd love to give us a rating in app, it takes just a couple of seconds. That would be equally as awesome.
Yeah, fantastic. And thank you for all the love and support, guys. It really does mean the world to us. And the big reason why we come and do this a couple of times every week. Okay, Fun Stats Corner. I love how this gets like a yellow fluorescent highlight.
It gets bigger. It used to be one chart, and now it's 2 pages.
Well, not only that, but the font is bigger. It's boldface, and now it's highlighted. Just well, I'm going to miss it if it's not. So this is a me thing more than anything. But from motorsport.com, in the last 10 years, Ferrari has 23 wins. In the same time period, Max has 25. So Max is
Wow.
greater than Ferrari. That's a big one. And then this is kind of a big one. The drivers this year in 2022 wore 130 different helmet designs. And that is courtesy from George, the FCF1 on Reddit. That is amazing. That is just that is
Sebastian
huge.
Vettel, man. Sebastian Vettel, 14 different helmets this year.
Yep.
Lewis, 7, Gasly, 9. And what's remarkable about this is if you flash back to the Bernie Eccleston era, he strictly prohibited helmet variations. I think you were allowed one wildcard race a year where you could wear an alternative helmet.
Yep.
Otherwise,
Yep.
you could not express yourself via your helmet at all. And I
Correct.
also added a quick note in here. Earlier this year in April, we actually interviewed a Formula One helmet artist by the name of Tyler Sinarusa. That April 17th, he's done countless professional drivers' helmets, including Nicholas Latifi. Highly, highly recommend you go back and check out that podcast. That one was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, he was such a great interview. He was such a cool guy to listen to and just listen to his story and everything that goes into helmet design and some of the different drivers that he's worked with. Fantastic. Yeah, 14 helmet designs for Seb, but some of the other ones that completely kind of flew under my radar. Like I noticed that Joe Guan Yu had a number of different ones, but he had 7. That's quite substantial as well. Lewis
Did
had
you have a
7.
favorite this year?
Oh
Probably too many
boy.
to think of. I'll share mine to
Yeah.
start. My favorite this year, and sorry, that was a leading question only because I wanted an excuse to share mine. But my favorite this year was definitely the Lewis Murakami one. That one was awesome, and I'm
Oh
desperately
yeah, yeah.
waiting for somebody to release a 1/2 scale MIDI variant so I can buy it and display it proudly, or card it to every 1F race I go to, hoping that Lewis will sign it. But some really cool designs this year, and I hope it continues next year.
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, sometimes it kind of those things kind of escape me a little bit until like after the fact, and like I'm sort of catching up now that like I had no like I'd noticed throughout the year that Seb had different helmet designs, but it didn't occur to me that it was like 14. I mean, that's like 2/3 of the races. That's just amazing. But I mean, how far that they've come from, like you say, the Bernie Ecclestone like era where that was like it was just not a thing that he wanted them to do. And I love that kind of thing. Like if the drivers want to express themselves in that way, I mean, I think that's great. I mean, I understand the whole thing, like the jewelry ban and like the safety thing of like nose rings and that sort of stuff. And I know Lewis has kind of had the brush with the man when it comes to that sort of stuff and the authorities, just to like on because he has his his differences and is a bit resistant to that for his own personal reasons, which is fine. But you know Lewis wearing a chain or wearing the nose ring or whatever it is, that's something that we don't see unless he's outside of the car, but we see these guys in the car like all weekend long. And so that's when I love to see these really creative, fantastic, because it's more than a helmet design. Like these are like artwork, some of them, which I think is very cool to see. All right, moving along. Sergio Perez's salary throughout his Formula One career. This is actually pretty cool. So if you look at the ups and downs with the different teams that he's been with, so he started out with Sauber, had a year with McLaren in 2013, then was at Force India for 5 seasons till they rebranded as Racing Point in 2018, 2019. Spent the last 2 seasons with Red Bull. So now he's at these are all estimates because of course we never do get full disclosures on terms and amounts of salaries. But 2022 earned an estimated $8 million this year with Red Bull. Last year was $5 million. Last year with Racing Point in 2020 was estimated $6 million. First year in 2019 was just about 3.5 million. In 2018, when it was still Force India, was 5 million. And it's really seesawed all over the place. Like he started only a couple $100,000 his first year in 2011, but by the time he goes to McLaren, he's getting 2 million a year, over 4 million the first couple of years with Force India. And then, boy, it's basically halved after 2015 or 2015. He goes from 4 million plus to down to just under 2 million. So interesting to see how his salary when it's represented graphically like that, how it's kind of really like seesawed back and forth. But the trend line has been overall in the right direction in his 11 years in Formula One. Thoughts on that one, Hammy?
Nope.
Nope.
You did a great, you did a great job
I
summarizing
hate
that.
it when you do that. I hate it when you do that.
Only just to contextualize that $8 million, because I think we talked, we referenced that Forbes article last week or the week before, and
yeah, a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
That his 2022 salary is still maybe 1/5 of what Max Verstappen is earning, and justifiably so. I think he's still a very well paid driver, but certainly not in the sphere of his teammates.
Yeah, very, very. That's interesting, right? And then this is a cool one that comes from courtesy F1 Charts on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And this is going to be the average age of each Formula One team's drivers at the start. So when we get to the beginning of the season next year. On the oldest side, you have Haas. On the youngest side, you have McLaren. So at Haas, you're going to have Nico Hulkenberg and K-Mag. So it's funny, K-Mag is only 30 years old. I feel like when I see Kevin Magnussen, he feels so much to me like he feels like an old 30. Does that make sense when I feel he's like an old 30?
Totally.
Yeah, and then the Hulk, he's just about 35 and a half years old. So their average age is 33. Now, Aston Martin comes in pretty close at, well, they're actually tied with Haas with their oldest driver lineup, because you have Fernando Alonso, who's 113 years old, partnered with Lance Stroll, who's 24 and change.
By the way, how is Lance Stroll only 24? He's been in the sport for 2 decades.
I know when I say that like K-Mag is an old 30, I mean, Lance is definitely like an old 24, because I mean, he seems like he's been around Formula One for ages as well. But, joking aside, Fernando 41 and a half and definitely not showing any signs of slowing down in the car. Lance at 24 and a half. I mean, man, where does the time go? But then on the youngest side, you've got Lando Norris, that is, and Oscar Piastri. Lando just over 23, and Piastri will be just hitting 22 at the start of the season. That gives McLaren an average age of 22.6. But then, you go, we'll go back up to the top. So you got third place Mercedes, then Red Bull, Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, Alpine, AlphaTauri, and Williams. It's really interesting, though. I mean, Hamilton just over 38, George Russell at 25. That gives him a 31.5-year-old average for their 2 drivers. Red Bull, Perez, 33, Max, 25.5. I mean, geez, how did Max become 25 years old? That's that's a bit of a mind blower there as well. And then and Sainz and Leclerc as well. I mean, they're both in their prime right now. Sainz is 28.5, or will be at the start of the season. Charles will be 25.5. And again, it seems like those guys have been around for a while. It's funny because when I look at that pairing, like I just feel that Carlos is the older, more senior driver, just because he did have a couple of years on Charles in Formula One in some of the lesser teams before they paired up at Ferrari. But again, just like some of these other guys, it's just like how did Charles Leclerc become 25 years old? And then Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon at Alpine, they're both going to be about 27 years old at the start of the season. But then Williams, Alex Albon, 27. He looks like he's 15. I mean, that's a bit of a shocker we see him. And then Logan Sargent just 22 as well. So a couple of fairly young drivers in there. Yuki as well is only going to be 23 at the start of next season. So a very cool statistic right then and there. So then before we jump back into the news, then we have this one. This is via therace.com. So the 2022 share of points, the final results between the drivers at each of their teams. So Valtteri Bottas had 49 points compared to 6 for Zhou Guanyu. Lando Norris, 122 compared to 37 for Danny Ricciardo. So that's 77% compared to 23 for Ricciardo and Norris, or Norris and Ricciardo. So it really does kind of like even out quite a bit when, let's go down. Let's look at Red Bull. So that was a 60-40 split. Max Verstappen logging 454 points in 2022 en route to his second world championship. That's compared to 305, only 305 points for his teammate Sergio Perez. That's a 60-40 split. Ferrari a little bit closer. Charles Leclerc came out on top, 308 points compared to 246 for Carlos Sainz. So that's a 56-44% split. And then George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, 275 for George, 240 for Lewis. So that was a 53-47 split. And that was the same at Alpine. 92 points for Esteban Ocon and 81 for Fernando Alonso. Some pretty interesting stats in there, you know, when you look at it. I mean, I just when you see like the total between Max and Sergio Perez, I mean, that is just astronomical. I mean, over 750 points between the two of them, a 60-40 split between the share of the points logged. A very, very
Daily,
cool.
I have
cool stat.
one
Yes,
other
sir.
fun stat we have to share.
Oh, okay, go for it. Let's hear it, bro.
Earlier this week, and this totally blew up in my face. Earlier
Okay.
this week, the official at Scuderia F1 Pod Twitter account put up a
Yep.
poll. And the poll was, who did you vote for in the midterms? Daily
yes,
bracket
yes.
independent or Hamilton bracket independent? I am disgusted to say that Daily won the poll 52 to 48.
Yes.
So I am demanding a
That's pretty
recount. I am demanding a recount. Stop the steal. I'm demanding the recount.
So what is the margin of error in this poll? And I'm kind of surprised that poll was as close as it was, you know, but no, I'm
you're
just
so
being
full
mean.
of yourself. I was expecting to win 90-10, Hamilton. You're lucky you got as many as you did. But no, it was
That's
close.
hilarious.
Like, that's actually
cool.
perfect.
Cool.
Pretty much
Yeah.
50-50.
Yeah, no, that's the way that it should be. I was going to make you know, kind of a joke about make Scuderia great again, but you know that some people find that humorous, some people will be offended by
Move
that.
on.
Yeah, exactly.
On.
Yeah, we'll move on. I'll cancel the hat order. Oh, going back to the news, we talked about Binotto, obviously. So let's see. Okay, there's a story about Ben Sulayem. Where did that one go? Maybe you can rescue me here.
Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah.
Mohammed bin Sulayem, who's obviously heading up the FIA, has dismissed talk of a bad relationship between the FIA itself and Formula One. Formula One being kind of the commercial rights group. And this really stems from the fact that there appeared to be a lot of friction between the FIA and Formula One, Liberty in particular, which is the group that owns the commercial rights to Formula One. It kind of manages the business side. Does it kind of totally manages the business side. And in the last couple of years, there have been a couple of fairly high profile clashes between the two of them. Obviously, the outcome in Abu Dhabi last year was certainly one of them. Liberty was very unhappy about that. There was the intense desire by Formula One to shift to 6 sprint races for this current season, the season that just lapsed, and the FIA pushed back saying, we need more time to study this, we need more money, and they ultimately settled on 3, and I think that left Liberty very upset as well. But Mohammed bin Sulayem has come out and very clearly stated in no uncertain terms that the relationship between the two of them is in fact very healthy. And I'll pull up the quotes so I can share specifically what he said. But I think that the message here is that, especially for new fans, the relationship between the FIA and Formula One has always been incredibly contentious. And I would be very worried if it wasn't very contentious. So the quote from Mohammed bin Sulayem, I just pulled it up here. I can read it now. He's like, I'll tell you my relationship with FOM. First of all, I speak to Stefano, I think every 2 days. If I don't call him, he calls, and this is the way. Even before any meeting or before any decisions, it's a marriage. This marriage is going to last, and strongly. Furthermore, this article from motorsport.com continues, and I quote, Ben Sulayem reckons that the sprint race delay, which triggered accusations of quote-unquote greed from the FIA and chasing more money for hosting the events, was the catalyst for the idea of trouble between himself, the FIA, and FOM. But he is adamant, Ben Sulayem that is, but he is adamant that there was nothing nefarious behind the delay beyond him wanting to check that the FIA personnel on track had the capabilities to successfully police extra sprint race. Daily, any thoughts? You've been watching Formula One for decades, since at least the early 90s. The idea of clashes and a little bit of friction between the FIA and Formula One's commercial rights body certainly isn't anything new.
No, definitely not. I mean, at least from the outside, it seems like it's not nearly as sensitive or as touchy as it was in the past. I mean, it seemed in the bygone years, whenever there seemed to be a little bit of contentiousness between the both of them, it seemed like there would be talk, especially Ferrari would threaten to take all their toys and go home and set up their own rival league and stuff
Yes,
like that. And I
yes.
mean, so I mean, where we are, I mean, I can't imagine that it'll be completely frictionless all of the time, but it seems to me it's not as, as sensitive, like I say, as it has been in the past. I mean, and I go back to just a couple of years ago, they reached a new Concord agreement. They came to salary cap discussions and got that all rounded out in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic when nobody
Right.
knew what was going to happen literally a week or a month down the road. But somehow Formula One was able to get together and take care of all these things. So that is just one of them. So that's kind of amazing.
You
So
you could
yeah,
argue
go
that
ahead.
maybe the relationship has never actually been better because you're absolutely right to hammer out
Fair. Yeah.
A
Yeah.
Concord agreement with massive revolutionary changes such as stricter regulations and a cost cap. That was absolutely remarkable. And ultimately, I think it's key to remember as well that the FOM Liberty, their role is to push the boundaries of how they can maximize revenues and profitability associated with the sport. Sometimes it's the responsibility of the FIA to push back and make sure
Mhm.
that they are the guardians of safety and integrity on the track. So naturally, they're pulling sometimes in different directions,
Yep.
and I think it's okay that there be a little bit of friction there. If the FIA is pushing back because hey, we need more time to study executing 6 sprint races because we need to make sure we have the personnel to deliver that experience safely, that's an okay thing. And if FOM is pushing that, hey, we need sprint races because we need to grow the sport, and they can come to some sort of compromise, then that's an okay thing too. So I think that they have different responsibilities, and naturally they're going to pull in different directions sometimes. But ultimately, it seems like more often than not, they land in a pretty good place.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? I mean, you're never going to see eye to eye like when you have two different bodies like that. But I mean, if they're working together somehow towards like the same common goal, then sure, there's going to be some differences along the way. I mean, there's going to be a differences philosophy, whatever it might be. But I mean, if they can get together and overcome these differences, then ultimately that's what it's about. Because it's not really either one's like role to be, I mean, like I say, it's never going to be frictionless. So there's bound to be some conflict at some point, and like you say, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, yeah, just one other thing before I was about to jump to the next one. I thought it was kind of an interesting one, but I just couldn't help but feel that I don't know where this one came from, but it just kind of had the feel of like somebody trying to make news that wasn't news this week. But maybe that's just me being conspiratorial in in my thought. Anyways, let's take another quick break. When we come back, we talked about Saudi Arabia a little earlier. Well, Saudi chicken sandwiches. So now we will talk about actual Formula One racing in Saudi Arabia, and we'll do that in just a moment. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. And yes, time to go back to Saudi Arabia. Well, at least sort of. We're not physically going, but we will go there in spirit. And Jeddah, the Corniche circuit, is undergoing further track changes before the Grand Prix in 2023 to try and improve safety at the track. And this seems to be like an iterative process. We've already had two races in Jeddah, and they came fairly close together. One at the end, towards the tail end of the 2021 season, and then we were back to Jeddah again very early on in this season. And the first running at Jeddah was marked by a whole bunch of very spectacular incidents on the track, and a lot of comments from the drivers even before they got there, before they actually raced around it, that even though it looked like a very spectacular and very fast track, there was a lot of concerns for the safety and all the things that could happen, which played out in large part of that very first edition. So that led to a lot of changes after year one, and they didn't really have a lot of time to turn it around. When was? Do you remember offhand, Hammy, when we went to Jeddah this year? I think it
December
was
2021, right? Like
it was
right at the beginning of
21.
December. Yep.
Yeah, and when we were there this year, was it April or March?
March. Yeah, March.
It was pretty early on in the season. So they did a substantial amount of work to get it all sorted out. But then, I mean, now they basically have a year between both, between the last race in Jeddah and before the next one, and of course, eventually they are going to move on to another facility away from there. But it's popular with the drivers, but there is a real concern about the lack of runoff areas, because I mean, we've seen it, we've seen a lot of crashes there, and we all remember the very spectacular one that Mick Schumacher had this year that actually forced him out of the race. I mean, number one, he completely destroyed his car, and fortunately he was okay, but he did have to sit that one out. So Hammy, what is the work that they're exactly going to be doing there? I know that they're doing some work around some of the different turns to adjust sight lines and basically visibility.
Yeah, I'm going to quote this right out of racer.com because I think they can do or think they do a better job of articulating the changes. And before I do, I just want to add that I think this is really good. And you and I talked a lot about this because we were actually podcasting at the time, but there was an
Yep.
awful lot of criticism from the drivers after the 2021 event, in part because it's an incredibly fast track, but also because there's so many blind corners. And the fear not being that the drivers couldn't react to the corner, but rather they didn't know or couldn't react if there was an incident beyond that blind corner. So big changes for 2022 when they turn those around in just 4 months. Sounds like there's going to be big changes again. And again, quoting from racer.com here, after some minor changes were made last year's discussions with F1, the FIA, and the drivers has resulted in further work being done to address sightlines, with the walls at turn 14 and turn 20 being moved back to improve visibility. The turn 22-23 section has also had work done to move the wall and update the curbing, with a beveled curb introduced that is designed to slow drivers down by approximately 50 kilometers an hour. For our American listeners, that's 31 miles per hour. Rumble lines have also been added at some corners to slow cars by shaking them and causing them to lose traction. And I quote here, this is also in the article, but the evolution of the Jeddah Corniche circuit continues apace, and we are excited to add these further tweaks to our magnificent track as a result of positive consultation with the FIA, F1, and the drivers, Saudi Motorsport Company CEO Martin Whitaker said. The previous two races here in Jeddah have already confirmed the JCC as the world's fastest and most exciting street circuit, and these new developments will only add to the spectacle that fans can expect to see next March when F1 returns to our city, Jeddah. It is vital for any circuit to listen and learn from those racing on it and use their feedback to grow and improve at all times. We are confident that these changes will lead to even faster, more exciting, and crucially safe racing, and we can't wait to see the world's greatest drivers battle it out here under the lights again in 2023.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, something needs to be done. And I really love the attitude that they're really open and willing and actually get this done, being a little bit proactive to the feedback that they're getting from the drivers. Now, sticking with the street circuit theme, Max Verstappen had a couple of things to say about street circuits, and I could read it a little bit to you in Dutch. It comes from Formula 1.nl. Formule 1 auto's zijn daar echt niet voor gemaakt. Ik vind stratencircuit totaal niet leuk meer. Met de oude auto's was het nog wel te doen, maar nu... Anyways, I'll translate. Anyways, Max
Thank
was...
you. I was looking to change the language like this was Netflix.
Oh, the translate. Yeah, no. So what Max is basically saying is that he did... he's not enjoying racing street circuits anymore. So he said that the new cars that debuted earlier this year, they're just not designed or made for street circuits anymore. Because let's see, what did he have to say? So, well, basically he says he doesn't like it. He said that in Monaco and Singapore, he was really super disappointed just to how the car was going through going around the circuit. Too heavy, very stiff. He can't take the curbs anymore. He said that these cars are just not built for street circuits, and basically said, yeah, they look great for photographs, but they're not made for racing anymore. So that's interesting. That's not really a take that we've heard from any other driver this year. And I mean, I think we talked about it. It would have been about a year. I think it was for the Monaco Grand Prix last year. Remember, there was a graphic that came out that kind of showed the evolution of the size of Formula One cars over the decades, and it was really amazing when we saw a Formula One car from 2021 compared to a car even 10 years ago or 20 years ago and even further back, just how much longer and wider that these cars are now. And then, of course, this year we saw a complete reboot of the formula, more or less. And but Max Verstappen was saying that, basically, even though that these cars before this year were still very big and wide and long and all that, they, you could still drive them. They were still, able to race fairly good on a street circuit. But now he thinks it's just impossible. So other than being a good photo op and maybe a bit of a spectacle, it's just not there anymore. And Max certainly not one to hide his true feelings. Okay, next story. So Red Bull, according to Zak Brown, the move of the Australian to Red Bull from McLaren as a reserve driver for 2023 offers him the best chance of an instant comeback, according to his former boss, CEO of McLaren, Zak Brown. So he figures that, in his own words, that Ricciardo could turn his Formula One career around on a dime. I don't know what am I missing here, Hammy, because I think that, I think that Zach is being quite flattering towards Ricciardo, and certainly he's going to a big team, even as a role as a reserve driver. But can he really pivot on that and then turn that back into an instant drive again for 24? I don't know, maybe, but it's an interesting take from Zak Brown.
It's also interesting that that take is in fact coming from his previous boss at McLaren, who
Yeah,
of course
yeah.
helped exit him early from his contract. So
Yeah.
it's nice to say he suddenly has supreme confidence in him, not as though they didn't give Daniel Ricciardo every opportunity to be successful in that Mercedes-powered McLaren. But I do agree, and I think you and I have talked about this so much, that the worst thing that Daniel Ricciardo could have done if he aspires to drive a Formula One car again full time, the best possible thing that he could do was position himself as a reserve driver at a world-class organization. And there was presumably, reportedly, an option at Mercedes, and there was an option at Red Bull. And to be around a world-class organization, spend time in their sims, spend time in their garage, spend time looking at their data, get some testing time in the car. This is the best thing that he could do for his career, because it keeps him relevant, it keeps him in the paddock, and it keeps him front of mind. And like Zak Brown says here, if there is an instance where one of the two drivers, either Max or Sergio, can't drive for any specific reason, it gives him the opportunity to contend and compete in a Formula One Grand Prix, driving one of the best race cars on the planet. Like, that is the best possible scenario for Daniel Ricciardo, versus being in a broadcast booth or maybe competing over in Indy in a very different class of open wheel racing cars. So I think this was a very smart move. I would have been equally as happy if he went to Mercedes. And like I said last week, this is a great fit for him, and it's an exceptional marketing move for Red Bull themselves.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, moving along, the race organizers in Melbourne for the Australian Grand Prix are rethinking or redesigning the seating for the Grand Prix there, after they drew a record crowd over the 4 days at last year's Grand Prix of 419,000 fans, which is that's an all-time record for the Melbourne era of the Australian Grand Prix. And that's kind of cool. But I mean, that's not the only race that we've seen this year that has been broken attendance records. We've seen it throughout 2022
All
with this
across the calendar, man.
all,
All across the calendar.
exactly.
Austin
Yeah.
was a big one. They added grandstands this year, specifically as a reaction to the demand for tickets. They're expected to add grandstands next year. So it's not a surprise that Australia is looking to maximize on that demand. And if you talk about an ASP, or an average selling price of a ticket, in the thousands, or not the thousands,
Yep.
in the hundreds of dollars, if you can add 5,000 tickets, that's a huge windfall of incremental cash at little added cost to the event.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very good point, because when it comes to putting in more temporary seating, that is, it's not cheap, but I mean, relatively speaking, I mean, you're going to get a good return the extra money that you invested putting that seating in. But it's just sort of fascinating, isn't it, Mark, when you see these record attendances that we saw throughout the year? It wasn't just limited to one particular geographic region. It wasn't, say, limited to, say, the European races or the Asian races or the North American. We saw it across the board, from right from the very first race right to the very end, and it was something that we saw throughout the year, which was very, very cool to see. Next one I have here. Where did it go? It was about Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon. Basically, I think Esteban was saying that Fernando did what, 2% of the work or something like
Ooh,
that.
drama.
Yeah, drama. No kidding, right? So there, yeah, Esteban was being a little bit critical about his former teammate. What did you take it a little bit further from there?
Yeah, so I'm going to pull up the quote because I thought this one was a little bit spicy. And of course, let's take this back a couple of steps, because I think this conversation and these quotes require a little bit of context. And it's probably not something that's going to surprise, not something that's going to surprise a lot of people. But of course, Fernando had that shock, as the British press would say, that shock exit from Alpine halfway through the summer, when he announced, to the shock and awe of everyone at Alpine, that he was going to Aston Martin for the 2023 racing season. Of course, following that was some tremendous drama. But Esteban Ocon now is airing some laundry about what had happened during the season. And I quote here, and this quote's coming straight out of Racing News 365. "It is true that I was disappointed by what Alonso said in the press, but kept to himself internally," he said in an interview with Ou France. "I still respect him, but it is good that he is going to Aston Martin and that we each go our way. To be honest," he continues, "I did 98% of the work and he did 2%. I was overworked. I did all the development work in the simulator, and I also did all of the marketing activities." He continues when asked about his forthcoming partnership with Pierre Gasly. "We've known each other for a very long time. The first time Pierre got into a kart was mine. We drove together on the same circuits and the same races. We had a dream to drive together in F1, and that made the dream come true." So it's interesting because, of course, there's a lot of speculation about the relationship that Ocon has with Gasly. But to back that up, it's also interesting that Ocon is being so transparent about the relationship that he had with Fernando Alonso. And I think it's really important to kind of appreciate that what we see from the drivers in terms of the work that they put in, which is really practice, qualifying, and the Grand Prix, that's really just kind of the tip of the iceberg. And all the work that they do is what we don't see, which is the sheer amount of travel, the marketing appearances, the time they put in the sim, the time that they put in the garage debriefing, working with their engineers, the time that they're in the gym, the time that they're putting in their cardio. And basically what he's saying here is like, look, Fernando was basically showing up on a Grand Prix weekend and hopping in a car. I was doing all the marketing appearances. I was doing the sim work. I was doing the dev work. And it's just as well he's gone off in his own direction. So I think Ocon's probably hoping that the responsibilities will be better between him and Gasly, but it'll be interesting to see if Lance Stroll is willing to pick up the slack at Aston Martin in the absence of Sebastian Vettel.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, right? Just to watch Aston Martin next year, because this actually nicely into our next story. Mike Crack, the team principal there, says that they are on track to meet their or on target to meet their 5-year plan, but they're going to have to take a big step forward in 2023. So I mean, I think that is that's a very good admission from Crack. And I mean, they did struggle this year, but I mean, I think they're one of the more improved teams that we saw over the course of 2022. I mean, if you look at where they kind of started from, I'm just looking at the stats here. So Sebastian Vettel, I mean, of course, he didn't race the first couple of races because he had COVID, but he finished in the last 6 races. He was in the points 4 times. And where's his teammate Lance Stroll? Yeah, Lance not quite so good in the same stretch. He only had 3 points finishes, but they definitely improved in the second half of the season, maybe even a little bit before then, once they they got their new car, or they got all the development parts on there, and they started getting the car where they wanted to go, and they started understanding where things are. But they really do need to take a big step forward if they want to become the team that's, they said that they intend to be. So, meeting targets is one thing, but you're gonna have to deliver on the track at some point. So I think this is a team that has disappointed both of us the last couple of seasons. Perhaps our expectations, Mark, were a little bit too much too soon. But I think now that I've seen this quote from Mike Crack, I think I'm going to be watching them a little bit more closely next year, if that's at all possible. What about you?
I got to say, I very much appreciate how consistent Mike Crack and Lawrence Stroll have been about this journey. And, even going back a couple of years, Lawrence Stroll has been very clear when he's been interviewed, which is relatively seldom, but he's always been very clear that this is a big build. And of course, earlier this week, Aston Martin also unveiling the progress on their 200 million pound factory that's being built immediately adjacent to the Silverstone racetrack. But both he and the other leadership at Aston Martin have been very clear that this is a long-term build and we're building towards sustained success over a long period of time. All of that said, though, I was incredibly disappointed. And I think you and I had high expectations going into 20. We had high expectations going into 21. We had high expectations going into 2022. And we were significantly disappointed this year. It'll be really interesting to see what type of progress they make on the track next year. And it'll also be really interesting to see the driver dynamic between Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll, because I'm one of those guys that's been on Lance Stroll Island for a very long time, but my patience is wearing a little bit thin. And if Fernando starts running circles around him next year, I think that for the first time, maybe in his career, there'll be significant pressure on him to deliver, because when you're competing at the back of the midfield or even lower, the pressure when people generally acknowledge you don't have a great car. But if you have a good car and your teammate suddenly starts out competing you, then it starts to put a lot of pressure on you. But yeah, you're right. I think we should see a significant step forward this year, not competing for race wins necessarily, but they should be in a position to score a couple of podiums next year.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that just going back to the head-to-head graphic that we saw, right, a little bit earlier on. I mean, Vettel scored 37 points compared to 18 for Lance Stroll. So, I mean, there was a 63% split in favor of Sebastian Vettel. Okay, well, that doesn't sound like a lot of like a huge point difference, right? So, I mean, 37 to 18. I mean, who really cares? But I mean, what the where it really sort of comes and sort of smacks you in the face and cold, stark reality is if you look at how Sebastian scored those points, he had 15 top 10 finishes in 2022 compared to only 3 for Lance. And a couple of times, I think Seb's best finishes, I think he had a couple of 6. Did he have any higher than that? No, I don't see anything higher than that. Compared to Lance, his best finish was an 8th. And that was at Singapore. In the same race, Sebastian scored a 6. So, it seems kind of interesting when you see it put together head to head like that. Okay, so Formula One's aero plans for 2026 could include a reverse DRS. Hammy, what the heck is a reverse DRS?
I got to talk.
Don't answer.
I got to talk.
Don't answer. You can answer in a second. We're going to take a quick break, and then I'll let you do it then.
This is the ultimate tease. Ultimate tease for me.
It is. And I'll let you do it in just a moment, so don't go away. All right, welcome back. I thought that was actually quite not nice of me. That was very nasty of me to get you all jacked up like that, and then to put the brakes on like that and cut to a break. Anyways, I should have maybe been a little bit more tactful in how I did that. Anyways, so reverse DRS, Mark, I know you're all over the tech when it comes to Formula One. What is reverse DRS? This is interesting to say the least.
Yeah, so this is really fascinating, and I'm watching my computer in the background because I'm having some technical issues, and I fear I won't get through this rant. So if I put my hand up and start waving, it's because I'm having a technical issue. But specifically, this is more a bigger story about a concept called active aerodynamics. And currently, with the exception of the DRS system, Formula One cars have static means that when you start a race, your aerodynamic features, the aerodynamic features of your car are fixed, which means they don't change. The only exception to that, of course, is the DRS system, which is the flap in the wing that opens or closes to add or reduce drag. And of course, that's a system that was added, an artificial system that was added a number of years ago to help promote overtaking and create better racing in terms of a general spectacle. Now, this is where it gets interesting. So the FIA, Formula One are now open to the idea of adding or looking at adding something called active aerodynamics, which is aerodynamic functionality that lets a car effectively change its shape based on its position in the track. So sometimes cars have features that create a lot of downforce in a corner, but might have the opposite effect in a straight and create drag. So the idea being that this I would say, active aerodynamic functionality would allow cars to effectively change shape. And I'm probably speaking too literally, but it would allow them to change the aerodynamic features of the car on the fly. So this is very cool, very cutting edge. It's something that they've been capable of doing for some time. It's very costly, very difficult to implement. It adds a significant amount of complexity. So maybe it doesn't work with a cost cap. But the bigger fear here is the idea that it could be used to introduce something called reverse DRS, meaning that what they could effectively do is force a car that might be leading a race to add additional drag to their car via this active aerodynamic. So if I'm Max Verstappen and I'm pulling ahead, I'm 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds ahead, they may add a feature or enable some functionality in the aerodynamic features of my car to add drag to intentionally slow me down to allow the rest of the field to catch up. So I have some thoughts on this that I'll share, but now that I've kind of described it and set that up for you, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, I mean, I think the technology and just the fact that they're able to do that is just, I think it's really, really cool. But I just can't help but get the sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach that this reverse DRS idea is kind of like using the tech for, I would say, for evil, but you know what I mean? Using it in the way, I just feel like it could be implemented in such a better way than rather than kind of like sort of penalizing somebody because they're faster than everyone else. I mean, I kind of understand it, and just in general, I'm not a huge fan of DRS to begin with, be it what we have right now or potential. You want to go as far as call it a mutation of DRS to really kind of influence and I guess bring cars closer together and give following cars the opportunity to pass the car in front of them. So I don't know. I would love that they could get to a place where they, the DRS in whatever form just isn't in the conversation to begin with, regardless if it's reducing drag like we have right now or increasing drag, which is this proposal. But that's just me. I guess in some sense of the word, I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to racing. I don't like all these gadgets and doodads
Yeah,
and things like that.
Daily, I couldn't agree with you more on this, that I think if you have this type of technology, your time and your energy and your resources have been misspent. Fix the root cause. Fix the root cause of the performance deficit between the top and the bottom teams. I absolutely despise these artificial aids that are designed to override the actual action on the track and create this artificial competitive parity. Can you imagine being in a situation where you as a driver have done everything right that weekend? You have the best pace, the best tire management, you're out in front, you have clean air, and this active aerodynamics kick in that creates drag that allows somebody that's having an inferior weekend to catch up to you. Like, to me, that's infuriating. And like you, I hate DRS. I get why it was there when it was introduced more than a decade ago, but I want that gone. I certainly don't want to introduce more of that kind of artificial tinkering. And, I'm very happy because I think Formula E is getting rid of it, but Formula E has that functionality called fan boost, which is basically fans voting online to enable a specific driver to have some incremental power on the track. I thought that was atrocious. And for me, that was a huge turnoff from Formula E, that the fans at home could influence the outcome on the race. But again, if a driver's out front and they're in clean air and they're putting a huge gap between them and the rest of the field, fantastic. Good for them. They've earned it. The sport's got to figure out the root cause of how that happened. And you don't solve it by introducing some sort of artificial active dynamic aerodynamics that slows the drive. And I'm getting carried away, but I hate it. I think it's terrible, but I do love the idea of active aerodynamics as long as they're uniform across the field, that every team has them and every team can use them at the same point on the racetrack. That I think is cool. I just don't know how it's going to be compatible with the cost cap.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, like you say, these are very complicated and very difficult systems. I mean, look at the issues that we had this year with porpoising. And I mean, in the end, they came out with a TD to sort it out. This is what you guys need to do to your cars in order to basically get rid of the porpoising effect. Anyways, I just wanted to ask you about a couple other things. I mean, we're on the record now. We're both obviously not fans of a DRS. Things that have come and gone in Formula One, like dual axis steering, active suspension. What do you think of those? Because those have all been banned as well.
Love them
yeah.
all.
Okay.
Love them
Okay.
all.
So
And I think though,
so where's the difference? Where's the difference though? Like why are you in favor of something like active suspension or dual axis steering and not the with the DRS?
I think they're different things though, right? Like DRS isn't a driver aid. I suppose it is a driver's aid, but I think it's the implementation of that driver's aid. That if it was available to every driver at every moment on the track, sure, fantastic. Because a DRS is in fact actually active aerodynamics. That is a perfect example of active aerodynamics. It's more about the way that it's being implemented. That if I'm the lead driver, I don't get to use it. But if I'm in second place and within a 1 second gap in a DRS zone, I get to use it. Like, that's not cool. Whereas active suspension and all these other kind of pieces, those are tools and aids that are available to the driver at all times on the track. They don't need to be 1 second behind somebody else on the track to be able to activate that functionality, right? It's not like active suspension kicks in when I'm second place in a second behind the lead driver. So I think it's more about the implementation, but that does open a really, really big Pandora's box of questions, which is what driver's aid is too many driver's aid. And Formula One had active suspension 30 plus years ago, and they banned it because they have to have this balance between the most modern cutting edge race cars in the world and a really significant role for the driver as an individual. You can't make these cars, they're never going to be easy to drive, but you have to have some semblance of skill requirement in Formula One. And if you have active suspension and you have all of these other tools at their disposal, maybe it just gets too easy to drive a Formula One car relative to how it is today.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough, right? It's just like where's that fine line between, you know, the cars are still challenging to drive, but too many driver's aids make them less difficult to drive, right? I mean, the great drivers are always going to be great drivers. And I mean, you could throw a Max Verstappen or a Lewis Hamilton or Charles Leclerc out into a shopping cart and they'd still be throwing down like impressively good lap times, like lap in and lap out. It's just like, yeah, where is that line? But no, I like the way that you explain that the DRS as it is now is selective. It's only available to certain drivers at certain times. Whereas if they all have dual axis steering or they all have active suspension, it's something that's on the car and it's active all the time. So that's, I think you explained that nicely. And I completely understand and would agree with that point of view. Oddly enough, I guess not oddly enough, because we tend to agree with each other way too much, according to our critics. Okay, last story of the evening. This is about W Series champion Jamie Chadwick and some news involving her. So, Hammy, I know this is something that's really near and dear to you, well, to both of us. But why don't you tell us what's up with Jamie Chadwick?
Yeah, so big news. So Jamie Chadwick, the two-time defending W Series driver, appears to have or has signed an agreement to race for Andretti Autosport in the Indy NXT Series. That's a mouthful for me. The Indy NXT by Firestone 2023 season. And the Indy NXT, for those that aren't familiar with that concept, was previously known as the Indy Lights Series. That is the principal primary feeder series into into Indy. It's kind of Indy's F2 equivalent. It's not as rich. The prizes aren't as big. The field can sometimes be a little bit sparse. But I think it's a really good place for Jamie Chadwick to go. And I think the
Hmm.
challenge for Jamie is none of us really know how good she is. What we know of Jamie is she's an incredibly intelligent, incredibly smart, incredibly dynamic driver that has dominated the W Series for 2 years. But I think that this racing series will really help to illustrate where she is in her development journey. And it's very possible that we discover that, hey, unfortunately, she's not that competitive. And I think in the spirit of cheering for women in motorsports and crossing my fingers that we're going to have a woman in Formula One in the next decade, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I'm still very confident. And I've said this so many times before. I think that the next female, the next woman Formula One racing driver is out there. I still think she's probably in kart. And I think she's there because I don't think any of the women competing in the higher formulas today, in the W Series, et cetera, have necessarily had the advantages that their male peers have had in terms of development in their junior series and their karting careers. But I think this is a great step for Jamie, because we don't know how talented she is, because she's dominated a championship that is relatively new. And I think she's going to go into the Indy NXT series, and is one going to be a massive, massive, massive help in terms of her development, because I don't think she was learning anything in the W Series, to be perfectly honest. But it's also going to help level set where she is in her career and her development journey. But I think even if she's not successful, I think it's important to remember, and I think it's important to be cognizant of the fact that she's a great driver. She'll always be a great driver. She just may not be the one that reaches Formula One next. And that individual, that woman is still out there somewhere. We just don't necessarily know who she is yet. But yes, she's going to sign up for Andretti Autosport starting next year. So it's going to be super exciting to see how her career progresses on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, it's very cool. And I was just had to kind of chuckle to myself there a moment ago. I must admit, I like the was it Indy NXT by Firestone, even though it's a bit like a bit of a mouthful. To me, it seems better than Indy Lights. Indy Lights to me always sounded like a brand of cigarettes.
Yes.
I don't know what
Oh my gosh.
it's
Yes. 100%. Now that you say it, I totally agree.
yeah. So I mean, and at least from that point of view, like India NXT, it seems a little bit more modern, a little bit more contemporary. It's all branding and stuff like that. But anyways, okay, I'm relieved, because I thought that was another me thing, but I'm glad that that I'm not the only one that kind of sees it that way. Anyways, Mark, anything else for tonight? Because I've come to the end of the that very long and extensive show outline that you so kindly prepared for us tonight, and I can't really think of anything else I really wanted to touch on this evening. So I think we're ahead of schedule, and since we kind of jumped a little bit all over the place tonight, I'm going to spare you the usual, self what do you want to call it? Basically the begging portion of the show where we ask you to rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We'll spare you all that. So anyways, if you want to get in touch, send us an email at scooterf1pod@gmail.com, or tweet us at scooterf1pod. As Hemi said off the top of the show, great to see all those messages for those of you, and see that we're in your Spotify Unwrapped and where we all kind of rank in that. So that really is wonderful. We appreciate all the support and love as always. And on behalf of myself and Mr. Mark Hamilton, thank you for listening tonight. Thank you to Rocky and Daniel and PNW Tree, everybody else that's in the chat on the live stream. Appreciate you guys hanging out and spending some time with us this evening, and we'll do it again very, very soon. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll talk to you again sometime in the next couple of days. Bye for now.